What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indies Sports Tickets, live on the Indies Sports Ticket app, which you can download on the Google Play Store or the App Store. Just go search for Indies Sports Ticket. Or you can watch, that's right, watch and listen live on Twitter. Just follow us on Twitter at Ticket1430. Or you can watch us on YouTube. Now, that's right, first day with the YouTube stream. Just big, ginormous things happening here at Indies Sports Ticket. You can find us on YouTube just go search for Indies Sports Ticket, and it should pop up pretty quickly. A bunch of links are on the Twitter page as well. Big day today. Knicks Pacers game 5. Oh man, cannot wait for the game tonight. It tips off at 7:30. It tips off at 8. What tips off at 7:30 is Caitlin Clark's WNBA debut. Are you going to watch? Are you not going to watch? Very interested to see what the ratings are for that game and how that kind of turns out. But before I get into all that, I do want to get into things that I've noticed in the NBA playoffs and why they bode well, just some different trends that I've seen and why they bode well for the Pacers and their future. So throughout the second round of the playoffs and in the first round, I've noticed that really big teams kind of tend to win, right? Like the playoffs are undoubtedly for big people. Okay, through the second round of the NBA playoffs, 16 games have been played after the conclusion of last night's games. The team that wins the rebounding battle so far is 14-2. 14-2, right? In a basketball world that was taken by storm by the small ball warriors, right? And Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and playing a 6'7" guy that is Draymond Green at the 5. Like that is absolutely taken the world by storm, right? Like it did. Like that was what basketball was all about. It was all about being able to go small and do all these different things. But the truth of the matter is that basketball was not made for little people. It was made for big guys, and having big dudes is still the best way to go about it. Okay, having multiple centers is important, right? Like just ask the Knicks who have lost, their backup center, right? Like it's tough when you don't have a guy who can really defend the rim. Okay, having multiple centers is important so that you can defend the rim and also rebound, right? And when we look at the Pacers and the games that they've won in their series against the Knicks and even against the Bucks for that matter, they've done two things really well. It's really decided a lot of their games. When they've defended the rim and they've rebounded well, they have won games in the playoffs. Okay? Like in a world that has very much become about how well your team shoots the ball from 3, right? And all those different things. Like you still have to be able to rebound and finish possessions, right? Like the Knicks beat the 76ers in the first round because they defended the rim and rebounded better than the 76ers. And they did that because they're huge, right? And they also did that because the 76ers' best big, Joel Embiid, was hurt and he couldn't rebound and he couldn't defend the rim like he normally does. Okay, the Boston Celtics look unbeatable when their best center, Kristaps Porzingis, is available. To be honest, they looked pretty unbeatable last night as well. Right? So the Pacers, right? Like let's stay local here. The Pacers are way tougher to beat when Miles Turner plays well. Okay? The Mavericks are tied 2-2 with the Thunder, and the teams that have won the glass have won all of those games. That's what it's all about so far through the playoffs. Do you have the size to rebound and defend the rim? Right? The Timberwolves swept the Suns in the first round in part to the fact that they were so much bigger and they just crushed Phoenix on the glass. Okay, a few years ago, more like 8 years ago in 2016, Steph Curry just took the league by storm, and the league very quickly, made this change to where what they wanted to do was like, we want to shoot the basketball, right? Like that's very quickly what the league became about. And like, I'm not going to sit here and tell the league that they were wrong, right? Because if you look at the teams that have shot the ball well from 3 in the playoffs, like they've won a lot of games. Like that's very much an important part of winning basketball games in today's day and age, right? But that's not what it's all about. Like it's not all about shooting anymore. It's also very much about having size. And look, I've watched 98% of the minutes that have been played so far throughout playoff basketball. Like I've sat down on my couch every night and just watched a lot of hoops. And my wife, love her to death. The fact that she's been so willing to, let me do that. Thank you so much, Amelia. I really do appreciate it. I know she's not listening, but it's the thought that counts, right? And it's very much about being big. And the Knicks have reminded me of that, right? Like their size against the 76ers, their ability to rebound and their size advantage before all the injuries against the Pacers was evident. The Mavs and Thunder series has reminded me of that. Like it's more than just having a bunch of guards who can shoot the ball, like the Warriors made us think starting going back like 8 years ago. And the other thing that's become really apparent is how hard it is on smaller guys in the NBA to be reliable options in the playoffs. What Jalen Brunson is doing is extraordinary. It's absurd, to be quite honest. Right? Like players that are small just usually aren't as successful in the postseason as the number one scoring option or as the best player on their team. Right? Like when we look throughout the course of NBA history, the only small guys that really succeeded on like an NBA finals type of scale are Steph Curry, Isaiah Thomas, Jerry West. That's pretty much it. And when we look across the playoffs right now, who are the best players? Jokic, who's 7 feet tall, Luka Doncic, who's 6'7", Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's 6'6". He was awesome last night, by the way, if you didn't get to watch that game. Pascal Siakam, he's 6'8". Tyrese Halliburton, 6'5". Jason Tatum is 6'8". Jaylen Brown, 6'7", right? And I think that guys start to look small and size becomes a factor when they fall under 6'4", so guys that are 6'3" and shorter, I think kind of start to look small. So I would say Anthony Edwards and Jamal Murray, who are both listed at 6'4", like those guys look big compared to other guards, right? And those two guys in particular have had really big roles on the success of their teams throughout these playoff runs, right? And all these bigger scores just seem to have an easier time than guys that are smaller, right? Like smaller dudes like Donovan Mitchell, who's been great for the Cavs, Darius Garland, and Jalen Brunson. Even if they have, explosive offensive games, they just have a much harder time generating offense, right? And even though Brunson and Mitchell have had some really impressive stretches, especially Jalen Brunson, like they have to work so much harder than these bigger wings to get good shots, right? Like we saw that with Jalen Brunson in games 3 and games 4. We saw it with Jalen Brunson against the 76ers when the 76ers decided to put Nick Batum and Kelly Oubre on him, right? Because teams just have so much size now that these smaller players just kind of get swallowed up, right? Like we saw it, we've seen it throughout the playoffs with Darius Garland, the starting point guard for the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? Like you need to have bigger wings who can get good shots in order to be able to win a title, right? And over the course of NBA history, like this has been the case. Teams led by bigger players just seem to have a better chance at winning the NBA title, right? When we look at every finals MVP from the year 2000 up until today, only 3 of them have been listed at under 6'4". That's Chauncey Billups in 2004, Tony Parker in 2007, and Steph Curry in 2022. Everybody else was 6'4" or bigger. There's only one other guy that was 6'4", and that was Dwayne Wade. Hey, bigger stars, bigger guys that can go and get buckets tend to win titles. Why do I bring this up? Why does this matter? Jonathan, Knicks, Pacers, Game 5 tonight. What does this have to do with the Pacers? I bring this up because I like the way that Kevin Pritchard has chosen the 2 stars for him to build this team around. Okay, Halliburton is 6'5". Pascal Siakam is 6'8". Okay, like we never have to worry about watching a playoff series and seeing one of the 2 stars for the Indiana Pacers being swallowed up by bigger defenders, like how Brunson was swallowed up by Aaron Nesmith in Game 3 and Game 4, or like how Jamal Murray, who's 6'4", by the way, has been swallowed up for stretches against the Timberwolves by Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker for stretches during that series. Okay, when we look at the future of the Pacers, right, because this team is not a finished product, like they have a ways to go before they're good enough to win a title, because look, whoever wins this Knicks and Pacers series is probably going to get ran out of town by Boston. Okay, Boston has a historically easy run to the NBA Finals, in part because they're really good, but also in part because the Eastern Conference as a whole isn't very good, right? And the Pacers are trending upwards, right? I think that the playoffs so far have been very evident of that, right? Like, there's a lot of evidence to point to that the Pacers are moving in a positive direction, right? And when we look at the future of the Pacers, the size of the stars is a major advantage. Like, look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that, people looking back to last year thought was on this upward trajectory, similar to where the Pacers are at right now. But the issue that the Cavaliers have run into is that their two best players aren't very big, right? Donovan Mitchell is the exception to the rule here. He's a guy who can go and get a bucket, but they have relied on Darius Garland, and he's just been too small to compete in their series against the Boston Celtics, right? Like, it's really hard to win a lot of games, especially in the playoffs, when your best player isn't very big. And that is one of the things that Kevin Pritchard, I think, has done properly in rebuilding this Pacers team, is there's an emphasis on size, especially with guys who handle the basketball. Okay, like Andrew Nembhard is listed at 6'5", which is, I think that's blasphemous. I think that they just flat out lied. But if you go to Basketball Reference, Andrew Nembhard is listed at 6'5". I don't think that that's true, but that's what he's listed at, right? Like, the only guy for the Pacers that plays legitimate minutes, that handles the basketball, that's small, is TJ McConnell. And he's 6'1". He's the exception to the rule, right? And as we continue to work through, the history of the NBA and the NBA right now, it's about bigger dudes who can handle the basketball, and the Pacers have that, right? And so whether the Pacers advance to play the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals or they end up getting sent home, Pacers fans, we know two things that are going to continue to be true and should give us faith in the rest of this rebuild. Number one, their two best players are never going to be eliminated from a playoff series because of their size. It's not going to happen. Okay. Two, Kevin Pritchard knows and understands what wins in the NBA. He knows and understands what wins in the playoffs. Right? And those two things are size and shooting. Okay, the Pacers have been built on those two things. TJ McConnell is the only player that consistently plays that's listed under 6'4". Nembhard, once again, is listed at 6'5". I don't think that's true, but hey, it's fine, whatever. Kevin Pritchard has this team headed in a great direction because he understands where the league is going. And when we talk about general managers and how they rebuild teams, that is the most important thing to know. Okay, the most important thing to know is, like, what wins in the league right now and what's going to win 3 or 4 years from now, right? And Kevin Pritchard understands that as well as any GM in sports, right? So I have complete and utter confidence in Kevin Pritchard to push this Pacers team in the right direction, unlike Chris Ballard with the Colts. Now, as great of a job as Kevin Pritchard is doing, and as great of a job as he is surrounding Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam with the proper role players, there is something that Kevin Pritchard cannot just go out and buy when it comes to surrounding Halliburton and Siakam with the proper role players. It's something like this is something that the players themselves have to actually go out and obtain themselves, right? And playoff history tells us that this is important, right? Like, one of the most impressive things about this Pacers run has been their ability to win tough playoff games despite having little to no experience for the most part. Now, obviously, Pascal Siakam has a lot of experience because he won a title with the Raptors. Outside of that, though, there wasn't very much playoff experience in this locker room. Halliburton, Nembhard, Isaiah Jackson, Ben Shepherd, they had never played in the playoffs before the Bucks series. Okay, Miles Turner, Aaron Nesmith, TJ McConnell, and Obi Toppin had very limited playoff experience, right? Like, Pascal Siakam was the only guy who would play deep, meaningful playoff games on the roster. And somehow, some way, it hasn't mattered. I think that really speaks to two things. I think it speaks to Pascal Siakam's ability as a leader to prepare his teammates for what's coming and what's to be expected. I think it also speaks to Rick Carlisle and his ability to do the exact same thing, right? Like, Rick Carlisle's coached in almost 150 playoff games, and he won an NBA title back in 2011. I'd love to bring that up. He's done a great job of helping these young players learn and adjust as they've gone through this playoff run, right? And as frustrating as some of the Carlisle decisions have been throughout this series and during the Buck series as well, the Pacers aren't here without him, right? Like the players seem to enjoy playing for him, and they've responded well to him throughout his time here in Indianapolis. And the players will need to continue to respond well to him again tonight. Game 5 is set to tip off at 8 o'clock tonight. I think that game's on ESPN. Not 100% sure there, but 8 o'clock, that is what time they're going to tip off. Don't know why they couldn't have tipped off at 7 like the Celtics and the Cavs did last night, but hey, whatever. I have 5 keys for the Pacers to take a 3-2 lead. One is obviously way more important than all the others. I will get into those 5 keys when we come back here in about 4 minutes.